1. The Brazen Bull. The Brazen Bull. 1. Throughout ancient history, and especially the early Middle Ages, there are legends of forms of torture that went far beyond the bounds of conventional cruelty. One of the most barbaric and iconic of these methods was the Brazen Bull. The story begins with Phalaris, a notorious tyrant of the city of Acrogas, present-day Sicily, Italy, around the 6th century BC. Phalaris is described in ancient documents as cruel, power-hungry, and enjoying human suffering. According to the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, Phalaris commissioned a blacksmith named Perilos to create an unprecedented torture device. The result was a terrifying sculpture, a life-sized bull cast entirely out of bronze. It was hollow inside, with opening doors, and its head was designed to act as a sound resonator. Once the victim was placed inside the cow, the guards would light a fire under its belly, turning the entire metal statue into a crematorium. The temperature gradually increased, the heat engulfing the body, causing the victim to slowly roast in excruciating pain. However, what makes Brazen Bull especially horrifying is the soundpipe system designed in the bull's mouth. The victim's painful screams are distorted, emitted like a bull's bellow, creating a vivid hell scene, both physically and mentally torturing those who witness it. According to legend, Perilos, the man who created the device, was the first victim. Phalaris, in order to test the effectiveness of his work, ordered Perilos to crawl into the bronze bull and set it on fire. Although he may have saved him from certain death, the cruel king then threw him off a cliff, killing the witness. Although there is no clear archaeological evidence of the Brazen Bull's actual existence, it is a popular image in literature, philosophy, and medieval documents. Dante Alighieri also mentioned this bull in Inferno, part of the epic poem The Divine Comedy. Today, many scholars believe that the Brazen Bull is more symbolic than real, intended to represent the cruelty of ancient tyranny, or as a cautionary allegory about power abused. Rat torture. Rat torture. During the Middle Ages, a time when justice was often meted out with blood and hot iron, torture methods became increasingly sophisticated and gruesome. One of them, seemingly simple, was one of the most brutal and gruesome ways to kill people in history: rat torture. It doesn't need a blade, a bone-crushing wheel, or a blazing pyre. Just a rat, a pot, and a little fire. Enough to turn the victim's body into a living cage, where the animal's survival instincts do the rest. How to do it? Simple, but full of haunting. The most common version of this method goes like this. The victim was tied tightly to a chair or the floor, his stomach exposed. A live rat, usually a sewer rat, a species known for its digging and aggressiveness, was placed on the torturer's stomach. Next, the guard places an upside-down metal basin or empty wooden barrel over the victim, trapping the rat inside. The bottom edge of the barrel is fixed or tied tightly to the person so the rat cannot escape. And then, a fire is lit. Embers, torches, or simply hot metal placed at the bottom of the barrel. At first, the rat panics. It runs around in circles in the dark. But then, as the metal heats up, its internal temperature skyrockets, causing its survival instincts to kick in. The rat begins to dig, gnaw, and claw at anything in its way, which in this case is the victim's belly. Death from within. Unlike a knife slashing across the neck or a fire burning the body, rat torture is death from the inside, literally. The rat dug through the abdominal skin, tearing away layers of flesh, bundles of muscle, even eating deep into the internal organs, causing the victim extreme pain. The initial screams quickly turned into muffled moans, as the body no longer had the strength to cope with the pain. Many people lost consciousness from shock. Others died from internal bleeding, and the rest survived only to slowly die of infection, gangrene, or blood loss in the following days. Who ideated it? There is no exact record of who first invented this form of torture, but versions of it have been recorded. In medieval Europe, especially in the Netherlands and Spain, under the Inquisition, it was used to force people to convert or expose witches. During the French Renaissance, some records describe soldiers torturing prisoners with rats in a furnace. And even documents from the Roman Empire and ancient China recorded similar versions of torture, where rats were turned into substitute executioners. Weapons of fear. The scariest thing about rat torture isn't the blood or the screaming. It's this: the torturer barely has to do anything. They just need to light a fire and then stand and watch. Pain, death, despair, all are entrusted to the instincts of a small, hungry, and death-fearing creature. That turns this method into a psychologically haunting torture tool, making anyone who has heard of it feel their hair stand on end, because it is not just physical torture, but the slow suffocation of humanity. 3. The rack, the pain-stretching machine. If there was one torture device that terrified medieval Europe, it was the rack, a machine that stretched the human body to its limits. Unlike the legendary torture methods, the rack was completely real, widely used in Europe, especially at the Tower of London, which was a royal prison and notorious interrogation center for centuries. The rack's structure mechanically, the rack was a fairly simple device. It consisted of a large rectangular wooden frame with 2 rollers at either end. The victim's hands were tied to one end and his feet to the other. The torturer then began to slowly rotate the rollers, round and round, causing the body to stretch horribly. At first, this causes only ordinary pain. But as it continues, the shoulder, hip, and knee joints begin to dislocate from their sockets. Muscles and ligaments gradually tear. Bones crack. The body is stretched abnormally. In many cases, the ribs, vertebrae, and even the spine are severely affected. Survivors of the rack torture are often never able to walk properly again. Many are confined to wheelchairs or carried to their execution sites. Purpose of the rack, the device, was not just used for executions. It was a specialized interrogation tool. During the 15th to 17th centuries, the rack was used to extract confessions, incriminate, or force suspects to reveal accomplices. One of the rack's most famous victims was Anne Askew, a Protestant noblewoman, writer, and preacher during the English Reformation. Accused of heresy, and was arrested in 1546 and sent to the Tower of London. There, she was interrogated and tortured with the rack, hoping that she would reveal the identities of others of her faith. Despite being dragged until she could no longer stand and remained silent, she was eventually burned alive at the stake and had to be carried to the execution ground because she was completely unable to walk. The rack in history today, a replica of the rack remains on display in the Tower of London Museum as a testament to the brutality of the ancient legal system. Remarkably, the rack was not outlawed in law until the 18th century and continued to be used in some parts of Europe until the early 19th century. It was not just a torture device, but a symbol of state power over human bodies and souls. 4. The scavenger's daughter. The scavenger's daughter. In the history of medieval torture, the rack is the most famous device for its ability to stretch the victim's body. But if there was ever a device created to be the exact opposite of the rack, it would be the scavenger's daughter, a crushing torture machine that put the victim into a state of desperate pain in the exact opposite way. Though not as widely referenced as other instruments of torture, the scavenger's daughter is a special symbol of sick creativity in the name of law. Origin and structure. The scavenger's daughter is said to have been invented by Sir Leonard Skevington, an interrogator serving under King Henry VIII. The device is sometimes called Skevington's daughter after him. Structurally, it is an A-shaped metal frame. The victim's head, arms, and legs are tied to 3 main points of the frame. Then, the joints will slowly bend, pressing the knees to the chest, the chin to the chest, and the whole body is squeezed like an animal trapped in a trap. Unlike the rack, where the body is stretched to the point of breaking tendons and tearing muscles, the scavenger's daughter creates a terrible internal pressure. The chest is compressed to the point of being unable to breathe. The blood vessels on the face and upper body are ruptured due to the pressure, leading to bleeding through the nose, mouth, ears, and eyes. Many accounts describe that after a few minutes in this device, blood would spurt from the body's natural orifices, turning the victim into a horrific, almost unrecognizable sight. Intended use like other instruments of torture of the Tudor period, England, the scavenger's daughter was used to extract confessions, especially in cases involving treason or heresy. Its brutality caused many prisoners to collapse mentally after only a few minutes of torture. However, compared to the rack, this device rarely causes immediate death, but the consequences for the body are extremely serious: internal injuries, hemorrhage, nerve damage, and paralysis. The rack's opposite symbol, 5, the thumbscrew. The thumbscrew. Not all forms of torture require large machines, heavy chains, or giant cells. Sometimes a small, handheld device is enough to make people scream and beg in despair. And the thumbscrew, the finger-crushing clamp, is the perfect embodiment of that small but mighty thing. Simple design, cruel purpose. Structurally, the thumbscrew was a remarkably simple mechanical device. It consisted of a sturdy metal frame with 2 plates and a large screw in the center. The victim's thumb, and sometimes index finger or toes, were trapped between these plates. The torturer would then slowly turn the screw, forcing the 2 metal plates together, crushing the flesh, tendons, and bones inside. There's nothing too complicated. No flames, no immediate gush of blood, but the pain the thumbscrew inflicts is sharp, lingering, and subtle, hitting the victim's psyche and nerves directly. Some versions of the device can squeeze all 10 fingers at once, or even the entire hand. More specialized versions have metal spikes inside that, when squeezed, will penetrate the skin, causing deeper damage. What is it used for? The thumbscrew is primarily used for quick interrogation, especially during warm-up or psychological intimidation sessions. It is often the first step in forcing the victim to reveal the truth or the names of their accomplices, before moving on to more advanced devices like the rack or Iron Maiden. However, in many cases, just a few slow turns of the screw are enough to cause confessions to flow out like a fountain, whether true or not. It's just a finger. Yes, the victim only has his fingers squeezed, but imagine, fingers are places where many sensory nerves are concentrated. When squeezed tightly, the pain is not only felt at the pinch spot, but spreads throughout the entire arm. The heart beats faster, breathing becomes labored, and the brain feels like it is on fire with sharp pain. As the bones were crushed, the sound of the shattering echoed out bit by bit, not in a rush, but in a creeping, creepy way, as if you were hearing your own body betray you. The universal tool of European torture during the 15th to 18th centuries, the thumbscrew was widely used throughout Europe, from England, France, to Germany and Spain. Because of its small size, ease of manufacture, and portability, it was often used by guards, wardens, and interrogators on the spot, without having to be brought to an official torture chamber. Some pocket versions were even made so soldiers could carry them when interrogating on the battlefield or at the scene of an arrest. The name thumbkin irony. Some historical accounts refer to the device as a thumbkin, a name that sounds like a child's toy. But that very name is part of a medieval psychological game. When you call an instrument of torture cute, you normalize pain. And when pain is normalized, cruelty can happen anywhere, even at the hands of people who seem merciless. 6. The pair of anguish. The pair of anguish. Among the instruments of torture in the Middle Ages, there were devices that caused physical pain and devices that caused mental pain. The pair of anguish combined both physical pain and psychological humiliation, especially for those who were its victims. The name sounds sweet pair, but the truth is quite the opposite. This is a disgusting, sick device, and just imagining it makes many people shudder. Structure and operating mechanism. The pair of anguish is made of metal, shaped like a closed pair, usually divided into 3 or 4 separate pieces, attached to a central spindle. When the spindle in the handle is turned, these pieces will slowly expand horizontally, causing the device to gradually swell from the inside. You can think of it as a mechanical butterfly hatch. When inserted into a body cavity, mouth, anus, or vagina, the slow expansion will cause soft tissue to tear, nerves to be severely damaged, and in many cases, death from internal bleeding. Intended use. Shame is more than pain according to documents from the early Middle Ages. From the 15th century onwards, the pair of anguish was used for different purposes, depending on the location of use. Put into the mouth. To punish those who are accused of lying, blasphemy, heresy, or religious distortion. Anal penetration. To punish homosexuals or those whose behavior is considered depraved. Inserted into the vagina. To punish women for adultery, abortion, or suspected witchcraft. It is worth mentioning that this method of torture was not only physically painful, but also completely humiliated human dignity, especially in the context of extreme religion, and the law of that period was closely tied to morality. Is it real? The authenticity of the pair of anguish is still hotly debated among historians. Several European museums now display versions of this device, mostly made of iron or steel and quite elaborately crafted. However, many researchers have found that most surviving examples were produced in the 17th or 18th century, that is, after the Middle Ages. Some have even suggested that the pairs were not used for torture at all, but were recreations for propaganda or historical exhibition purposes in the 19th century, when Europe was romanticizing the Middle Ages, including exaggerating its brutality. But what if it's real? Assuming the pair of anguish was ever actually used, it is arguably one of the most vicious torture devices ever devised. It requires no chains, no fire, no stretching, just a slow rotation of the hand, and your insides will slowly burst open like a bloody flower. Symbol of moralized punishment, the pair of anguish was not just a tool for inflicting pain, it was a visual representation of the moral and sexual control of the society of the time. It stripped the victim of their right to privacy, literally opening up them, and conveyed the message that any behavior that went against social norms, whether real or perceived, could lead to a tragic end. 7. The Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden. In every torture museum, the Iron Maiden takes center stage. With its open iron coffin, which opens to reveal dozens of sharp spikes, it embodies the haunting idea of a slow, isolated, and extremely painful death. But the truth behind this deadly virgin may surprise you. Horrible design, the iron standing metal designed to resemble a human coffin. Inside the shell are a series of spikes, not long enough to kill instantly, but long enough to pierce the flesh, damage internal organs, and cause the victim to die slowly from blood loss, pain, and panic. The Iron Maiden is a standing metal box designed to resemble a human coffin. Inside the shell are a series of spikes, not long enough to kill instantly, but long enough to pierce the flesh, damage internal organs, and cause the victim to die slowly from blood loss, pain, and panic. The door would close slowly. As the victim was forced inside, they were still conscious enough to feel each spike digging into their skin. Every small movement would cause the spikes to dig deeper. The airtight space would gradually suffocate the victim, while the sound of screams echoed off the metal walls, creating a haunting sonic prison with no way out. Fiction or fact? Despite being considered a symbol of medieval torture, there is no evidence that the Iron Maiden was ever actually used during this period. There are not even any medieval texts, documents, or images that describe this device. The most famous Iron Maiden was once displayed in Nuremberg, Germany, in the 19th century, but historians have determined that it was a reconstruction intended as propaganda. Most likely, the Iron Maiden is a creation of the 18th to 19th centuries, during a period when Europe began to recall the Middle Ages as the darkest period of humanity. People created or exaggerated forms of torture, put them in museums to shock and attract the public. One of the people suspected of being behind the Iron Maiden's popularity is Johann Philipp Siebenkees, a German scholar. He wrote that in 1515, a counterfeiter in Nuremberg was executed with the Iron Maiden, but that story has no historical evidence and is most likely fictional. Why virgin? The name Iron Maiden, meaning Iron Maiden, also has many meanings. It evokes the image of a pure woman, but is a cold-blooded and emotionless murderer. Some theorize that the name is a metaphor for medieval society, where women were stifled by religious morality, both deified and tightly controlled. The Virgin here is not a real woman, but a symbol of a cold and oppressive moral system. Truth in popular culture. Despite never actually being used in real life, Iron Maiden has become a powerful cultural icon. It appears in horror, period films, such as The Pit and the Pendulum, 1991, video games like Assassin's Creed, The Witcher music, especially the name of the legendary heavy metal band Iron Maiden Travel Museum. Where Iron Maiden replica is displayed to impress visitors today, historians often classify the Iron Maiden as pseudo-medieval, meaning a modern product with a medieval feel, rather than an actual ancient instrument of torture. So is Iron Maiden scary? It is terrifying, not because it has ever been used, but because it reflects humanity's collective obsession with systematic pain, legitimized by power. Whether true or not, Iron Maiden is a symbol of what humans can think of to hurt each other when empathy no longer exists. 8. Judas Cradle. The Cradle of Judas. Search like if you think torture devices like Iron Maiden or the rack was the final end. If you've never heard of Judas Cradle, then you've never heard of it. A torture instrument of great significance too, a terrifyingly creative torture tool where death comes not from fire, blood, or blades, but from the victim's own weight. Shape and structure. Judas Cradle, also known as Judas, also known as a Judas chair, is a pointed pyramid-shaped device made of wood or metal about as tall as the human torso. The pyramid is topped by a sharp tip, not sharp enough to immediately penetrate the body, but sharp enough to cause serious injury when it comes into contact with sensitive areas. The victim's hands and feet will be tied tightly and suspended from the top of the device, with the anus or vagina in direct contact with the sharp tip. Then, depending on the level of punishment, the guards will gradually release the rope, causing the entire body weight to be placed on the exact point of contact. And so, little by little, the victim's body presses itself against the spire. Flesh tears. Muscles are torn. Internal organs are damaged. Not in minutes, but sometimes in hours, even days. Pain without words. The horror of Judas' cradle lies in the fact that nothing happens suddenly. There is no ear-splitting scream of bones breaking as if being stretched. There is no massive spurt of blood like in Iron Maiden. Just a body silently collapsing under gravity, layers of skin, muscle, soft tissue tearing like fabric. The victim cannot scream too loudly because the pain is concentrated deep inside, where the pain spreads dully, throbbing, as if each blood vessel is groaning. Worse, the guard could also gently shake the victim, causing the tip to rotate and poke in different directions, causing more widespread damage. Intended use. The Judas cradle is believed to have been used primarily during the Spanish Inquisition to extract confessions from people suspected of witchcraft, heresy, conversion to other religions, or women falsely accused of illicit sexual relations. Because of the long-term nature of the torture, but not the immediate death, this device is suitable for the purpose of forcing confessions over many consecutive days, causing the victim to be mentally and physically exhausted, and eventually surrender in humiliation. Some accounts suggest that before being placed on the Judas cradle, the victim would be stripped naked, shaved of pubic hair, and smeared with oil or grease to increase lubrication and prevent premature death. This did not lessen the pain, but only prolonged the process. The name Judas, full of hidden meanings. Why is it called the cradle of Judah? Judas Iscariot, is a biblical figure who betrayed Jesus. The name of this device is a way to imply betrayal, punish the most serious sin, and at the same time create a deeply religious deterrent element. Some scholars also suggest that the name may have been coined later as part of an effort to reconstruct and label religiously the torture methods of the Dark Ages. Is Judas' cradle real? Unlike Iron Maiden, whose origins are unclear, Judas' cradle appears to have actually existed, with numerous copies and illustrations found in penal history museums in Europe such as Italy, Spain, and Germany. Several copies are on display in the Torture Museum in Amsterdam and San Gimignano, Italy, with notes detailing the method of use, duration of execution, and relevant testimonies. Fear comes from silence. While many torture devices cause victims to scream, the Judas cradle is famous for victims who simply cry silently or are unable to make a sound due to shock and silent pain. That is why this device became a symbol of a cold, silent form of punishment that destroys people from the inside out, physically, honorably, and spiritually. 9. Breaking wheel. Breaking wheel. Medieval, like killing if you lived in medieval Europe and committed a crime that was considered unforgivable, like murder, rebellion, apostasy, or apostasy. Terrible thing. The broken wheel. Then one of the most horrible endings that can await you is the broken wheel. Then a punishment. Breaking wheel is a ritual that publicizes pain. More than just a punishment, breaking wheel is a painful public ritual. Legal murder, a form of lawful killing intended to cause fear lasting from hours to days. Structure and usage. Physically, the breaking wheel was a large wooden wheel, usually the type used in mills or carriages. The victim would be tied in an X shape, lying face up on the ground or secured to a wooden support. The executioner would then use a heavy iron bar, often called a death stick, to strike the victim's arms, legs, chest, and back with force, the goal being to break as many bones as possible, but not to kill immediately. The body has been after the body was crushed to the point of almost losing its human form. Still, the body, alive or dying, will be tied to the wheel through arms, legs, sometimes with hands and feet through the spokes, and hung from a pole in the middle of the square for people to come and admire. And period, they may be left alone until, depending on the region and period, victims may be left to die of pain, starvation, or being packed up by crows. Calculated brutality. The scary thing about breaking wheel isn't just the pain, but the careful calculation to make the pain last as long as possible. In many versions of execution, the executioner is assigned to hit the non-lethal parts, such as the upper arms, calves, shoulders, to keep the victim alive as long as possible. Immediate killing is considered too humane and not enough of a deterrent. In some particularly severe cases, the executed person was subjected to at least 8 to 12 bone-breaking blows before being finished off with a final blow to the heart or head. Catherine and the Martyrs' Wheel. The name Catherine Wheel comes from Saint Catherine of Alexandria, a Christian saint who was executed in the 4th century. According to legend, she was sentenced to be tortured with the wheel for refusing to convert and rebelling against the Roman emperor. However, when she touched the wheel, the device miraculously broke, which was believed to be a miracle from God. She was eventually beheaded instead of being tortured. Since then, the Catherine Wheel has become a symbol of both martyrdom and extreme cruelty. Public performance and morbid satisfaction. The scary thing is, breaking wheel does not take place in secret. It is usually held as a public event in the middle of a central square with crowds cheering, shouting, throwing stones, and hurling insults. This is part of the public justice of the Middle Ages, where punishment is not only for the person being punished, but also a direct lesson for others watching. Many regions also extend the time of hanging the body on the wheel after death to let the body gradually decompose in the open air as a way to remember for posterity. The end of the wheel. It was not until the 18th century that many European countries officially abolished this punishment. However, there are still reports of the breaking wheel being used in some remote areas until the early 19th century. Today, the broken wheel is a classic symbol of brutal punishment, appearing in many literary and artistic works such as Game of Thrones, where the breaking wheel is used to punish rebels. The Witcher has a scene depicting villagers hanging from wheels. Dark Souls, Elden Ring, where the imagia symbol of false religious punishment, where the wheel became a symbol of false religious punishment. 10. The Spanish chair, horror on the iron chai. Search devices in which tool is just right. Of all the torture devices that appeared in medieval Europe, few were as crude and brutally effective, cruel as the Spanish chair, also known as Spanish chair, also known as iron chair, grill, nail, grill chair, or nail chair. Complex technical operations. But that Spanish chair, no complicated mechanical parts. No need for complicated technical operations. But that's why Spanish gyro weapon of torture became a convenient, popular, and easily applied weapon of torture. For all classes, class from religion, military to local government. For all levels of governance from religion, military to local government. Structure, the chair of hell. At first glance, Spanish chair looks like a power chair, for sure, like a seat of power in. Buterwood chair, this chair is made of sturdy, tall, with armrests and a backrest. But instead of being upholstered in velvet or precious wood like an aristocratic chair, this chair is made of iron or hardwood, covered with steel spikes sometimes up to hundreds of them, arranged on seats, backrests, armrests, even footrests. These tied to the chair, their body will be when the victim is strapped to the chair, their body is pressed down, causing the nails to pierce the skin, muscles, and tendons. Not enough to kill death, but causes. Not enough to kill instantly, but causes extreme pain especially when kept in the same position for many hours at a time. That's just the beginning. Slow burning alive. Cold torture with heat. The chair empty. There is an empty compartment under the chair. Coal, or a hollow chamber containing charcoal, designed for direct fire. A small charcoal. Or put a small charcoal stove underneath. Causes heat transfer from below. This causes heat to slowly transfer to the entire chair frame. Roast the victim's body alive, and began to roast the victim's body alive from the bottom up. The stake, the place of death. Spanish chair makes unlike being burned alive at the stake, where death comes quickly. The Spanish chair makes death slow, painful, and insidious. The flesh does not burn, but boils, peels, oozes blood and pus. Red iron. The red-hot iron nail burned through the muscle layer, transmitting heat to the bone. Human flesh, creating the acrid smell of human flesh being roasted amidst the air thick with blood. Used for torture or execution. Cruel, Spanish. Although extremely cruel, Spanish chair. The Spanish chair was not always used for executions. Cases, it was not always used for executions. In most cases, it was a tool of long-term torture. Term torture instrument, to extract supplies from, used to force supply suspected of heresy, which, or simply, against from those suspected of being heretics, spies, witches, or simply opposing the government. The prisoner to a chair for hours. Victims may be tied to chairs for hours, gradually or just left alone, gradually heated or simply left alone of the nails, to the pain caused by the nails piercing deep into the flesh, causing infection, necrosis, and nervous shock. The attack in some cases, to increase the psychological torture, the guards only lit the fire for a short time, let it cool, then heated it up again many times, causing the fire to burn, then let it cool, then heat it up again several times causing the victim to go through cycles of hope and despair. Tools of church and government. This device is most popular in Spain. During the Inquisition, especially during the Spanish Inquisition, religion is used as of mind control, where religion is used as a weapon to control thought. In France, Italy, however, it also appears in France, Italy, Germany, with different variations, like unburnt nail chairs, electric chair, original electric chair, hydraulic cheek press, or hydraulic blood pressure chair. Symbol of control and threat is then a viewing device. The Spanish chair was more than a torture device. It was a symbol of rule through fear. Shows that a chair sitting be a place you never thought would be, an object that represents sitting, can become a place you never want to sit in. To sit in. Heat of fire for heating, again a tool again, which is normally used for heating and lighting, becomes a silent, smoldering murder tool. And the bound one to or burned, without being slashed, skewered, or burned, but still dying slowly, gradually, with no way out. Psychological impact on society. By regular grill chair, public, or at least executions by grilling chair were usually carried out in public, or at least in crowded prisons, to create a psychologically contagious effect. Others heard screams and smelled burning. Smell image, and therefore easily submissive, will be haunted for life, and therefore more easily submissive. In some towns, people were forced to watch torture sessions with burning chairs as a way to discipline the people. The remaining legacy today, you can see replicas of the Spanish chair in many torture museums in Europe, such as Museo de la Tortura, San Gimignano, Italy, Museo de la Inquisition, Toledo, Spain, Medieval Crime Museum, Rothenburg, Germany, are anymore, but to remember they are still there, not to be used anymore, but to remind people that, when justice is not humane, the chair you sit on today could be held tomorrow.